Welcome to Growing Stronger Every Day, a video series which focuses on building stronger rural communities. In this video series, you'll hear from industry professionals about how getting calf nutrition right can have long-term impacts on the profitability of your herd. Through this series, we will also interview professionals who are passionate about rural and regional health and making a difference in our communities. It's our fourth video in the Growing Stronger Everyday series today, and we're really excited to have Dr. Sarah Bolton with us. Dr. Sarah Bolton is participating in Melbourne University's Dairy Residency program. She recently completed a Nuffield Scholarship, researching how best to increase the value of non-replacement dairy calves in order to maintain public trust in the dairy sector, while simultaneously creating financial opportunities for producers. It's with this background and Sarah's extensive experience with a wide range of calf rearing operations that she's the perfect person to speak to us today as part of our Growing Stronger Everyday series. So today we're going to get Sarah to touch on a number of topics which fall under her expertise: calf rearing practices, animal welfare, and the right to farm. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we're really excited to have you here. Can you just give us a bit of a background on your career and just especially in relation to your passion for calves?
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's really exciting to be here. So in terms of my background, I'm a vet. I graduated from Melbourne University Vet School back in 2012 and spent some time working in private practice and then in government and in industry as well. And then I guess through that time, I've always had a really strong interest in cattle and in dairy in particular, and have spent some time managing a dairy farm with my partner as well, which was what led to the Nuffield Scholarship, looking at how we manage our bull calves or non-replacement calves, and a whole lot of things that have fallen out of that from there.
Oh, very good. And what's the, I suppose, you've seen it from so many different angles, Sarah. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about or when you hear the words calf rearing?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, the thing that still comes to mind for me is challenge. I'm certainly no stranger to the immense responsibility that is rearing a whole heap of calves at one time. And I think whether we're looking at it at a farm level or at an industry level or even at a global level, there are so many challenges that are both old and new that are coming up in terms of how we rear calves. And I think that's going to be, the biggest thing going forward is how we best meet these challenges.
What are the biggest challenges you see sort of in calf rearing? So from a farmer perspective, from an industry perspective?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenges from me are probably in a few broad categories. The first is definitely on farm, and that is certainly health and production, making sure that we're rearing calves that have really low levels of disease and that exhibit really great levels of health, and that grow really well and grow up to be animals that produce in the way that is fulfilling their potential, whether that's as milk producing animals or as beef producing animals further down the track as well. On top of that, I think another big category of challenge is making sure that we're upholding calf welfare on farm and further in the supply chain as well. And that occurs on several levels too, whether it's nutrition, housing, husbandry, and the pathways that they go down when they leave farm as well, making sure that welfare is held up at every point along the journey of that calf's life and into adulthood as well. And then I guess the third big challenge is that public interface that we have as a dairy sector that has never been more prominent than it is now as well. And it's not just about how healthy our calves are and how much money they're making for us anymore. It's about our responsibility to make sure that those calves have the best life possible, and that agrees with the view that the broader community has of how we should be looking after our calves too. So it's not just us and our opinion anymore. There's a two-way conversation happening all the time with the broader community, and that's not something that's going away either. So we need to be really cognizant of that. And I guess from my perspective, there's a huge opportunity there to start looking at the way that we're rearing calves and running farms even. And going, well, is there something that we can change here that A, is going to make our business and our farm operate potentially more effectively and potentially even more profitably, that also could be a change that helps us further cement that level of public trust that we get to enjoy and make sure that our production practices are aligning with that too. So I guess to me, that's the real passion area, but the big challenge at the same time is, can we make changes that benefit our farm and benefit our animals, but also are really ticking that box in the eyes of the general community?
How are we as a dairy industry best to approach these challenges?
Yeah, so I think the hard thing at the moment is that, a lot of us are starting to look at this research and say, okay, well, that's great. I can understand that if I feed these calves more and I spend more on getting them well grown early on, that they're going to perform well, but is that going to actually result in improved financial returns? And I think we have a bit of work to do in that space in terms of really starting to nut that out. And it can be hard because a lot of those paybacks don't occur in a 12-month production cycle, where we're investing in gains that we're not going to actually benefit from until, a couple years down the track. So I think we've got some work in that space in terms of starting to institute a lot of these or some of these changes and actually drilling down into whether or not where the sweet spot is, essentially. And then I think the other big one is making sure that we're constantly keeping in mind that image that we're putting forward at an individual farm level, but at an industry level as well. And I think I was probably one of the most annoying people on farm when I was rearing calves, in that I had, my mantra, for want of a better word, was that you should be able to walk around the farm at any point on any day with a video camera and take footage that would be appropriate to go up on social media. And that, effectively moving towards full transparency is where we need to be aiming, and need to be aiming for production practices that are, perfectly appropriate for full transparency as well. But I think making sure that the production practices that we're moving towards are in line with that set of public values is going to be that real challenge, because we know that the public tends to look at or tends to make assessments of animal welfare in ways that are slightly different to what we do as an industry as well. So, from my perspective, I think as industry professionals and as producers, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on biological functioning when it comes to animal welfare. But when we look at social science, we know that the general public uses biological functioning. So, is the animal free of pain and, not sick and generally healthy and pain-free? But in addition to that, the general public tends to use naturalness. So are they being subject to a set of conditions that are relatively in line with what the public would perceive to be natural? And the other one's affective states, which is essentially things like emotions. And there's a whole lot of really interesting new research coming out that's starting to look at, well, in terms of the different things that we do or don't do with managing our animals, how does that actually impact their affective states? And, a few years down the track, I think we'll actually start to see more common conversations around things like even, depressive states in animals, or pessimism, and their ability to interact socially with other animals. But, that can actually directly affect performance as well, in terms of their ability to compete for feed and, integrate into the herd. So there's some really interesting stuff coming out that I think will be a really interesting conversation going forward.
Yeah, totally agree, Sarah. Just on that, Sarah, like if you look forward 10 years, like where do you think, so if I'm a calf rearer sitting here asking you, in 10 years time, what does my operation need to look like? What do you envisage we need to be doing as dairy farmers and calf rearers, like in that calf management space?
Yeah, so I guess 10 years isn't that long, but at the same time, it is in the world that we live in. I think the number one thing that's coming for us is how we manage our non-replacements. And obviously that's a real passion area of mine. But I don't think we will have some of the more traditional pathways for low value male calves available to us, in the mid-term distant future that we do now. And we're starting to see some moves already happening internationally in that space. So there are a few European countries that have already stipulated that by next year or a couple of years down the track, they won't allow any euthanasia of healthy calves, for example. And so I think we definitely need to have that on our radar, that's not going away. But the great thing is that there's a whole lot of conversations happening at that level within the industry at the moment that we're really starting to work on in a constructive way. So I'm fairly confident that we'll get there with that one, but it is going to take some time. But hopefully in 10 years we will definitely be there. I guess the next one, I think there will be a really interesting conversation in terms of that intersection between technology and intensification and data collection, but also that concept of naturalness as well, and how we ride that balance as an industry in light of that public perception issue too, but also taking advantage of the benefits that come from things like automated calf feeding systems and digital monitoring and that sort of thing. So I think we'll see some real changes in that area, and I think that that's really going to facilitate things like feeding calves more milk more often and making sure that animals are better prepared for weaning when we do decide to wean them, and picking up on diseases earlier on, getting earlier intervention, closer monitoring, that sort of thing. And then I guess, the other big thing that I think, if it's not 10 years down the track, then potentially 20 years down the track, that we know is a huge thing in terms of the information that we're collecting from the public and their attitude towards how we operate dairy farms, is the cow-calf contact issue. So it's definitely an area that is much further on the perimeter in terms of science, but both external to the industry and within the industry, that's something that we're having to discuss more and more as well. But again, I think that feeds back into that naturalness, technology, how we're feeding the animals, and there's a really interesting conversation and a whole lot of really interesting research features to come out of that going forward. So it's going to be interesting.
What are the things we can do today that will start that process of getting us to where we need to go?
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the big shifts in my thinking has been instead of addressing things at a very reactionary level and going, okay, well, I've got this issue, so what is the direct cause for that? It's starting to for me, it's been starting to take a step back and go, well, how can we actually set these animals up best in terms of how they've evolved and how they function physiologically for a healthy and productive lifetime in front of them, and really trying to make sure that we are setting them up in the best possible way in that respect. So, and again, it comes back to the basics. So making sure that they've got hygienic, comfortable housing, that they get all their colostrum, and that they've got good access to good quality feed and delivered at appropriate frequency as well. So I think for me, the big lesson is making sure that we're focusing on the details, at the same time taking that step back and going, well, is this setup giving this animal the best chance from the outset? And if not, what do we need to actually look at changing about this? And sometimes that might take a bit of a fundamental shift that we might not be ready for, but I think we need to actually start preparing ourselves for even considering some of those decisions in the medium-term future as well.